Hey friends, what up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Ches, Daf 48 of Masechta Ksubis, friends. Daf 48 talks about stuff, man. Also, talks about stuff. Talks about stuff. What kind of stuff? We're like wrapping up the Mishnah and starting a new Mishnah about people like getting married and stuff. Alright, so we're going to start on Daf Mem Ches, Amud Aleph, 2, 4, 6 lines into the page. Tanu of Yosef. It says of Yosef, She'era Ze Kerev Basar. That when it says in the pasuk She'era, right, She'era Ksusav Onosa, what's She'era? It means the bringing close of flesh to flesh, the flesh of the man and the flesh of the woman. Shel Yinig Ba Minig Parsim, that you should not, when he's having bia, it should not be like the Persians, Shem Shamshem Mitosein Bivushein, that they have bia when they are wearing their clothing. And this supports Rav Huna, Dam Rav Huna, that if a fellow says, look, I can only have bia, I have to be wearing my clothing, she has to be wearing his clothing. So, if he's going to be like that, then they have to get divorced, and he's got to pay her divorce document, the value of her ksuba. Yehuda Omer, Afilu Oni Shebisol v'chulei. So says Rabbi Yehuda that even a poor fellow in Israel, if his wife passes away, he's got to provide a eulogizer and 2 flautists. Michlad Tanakama Savar Hani Lo, implying that according to the Tanakame, he does not need to provide a eulogizer, a eulogist, and 2 flautists. Hechidami. So what are we talking about? Ida Orcha, well, if it's her way to have a eulogist and 2 flautists, my time in the Tanakama the Amar Lo. Well, then how come the Tanakama says that he does not need to provide these things? If it's, I guess, her minig to have these things, he should provide them for her. Delav Orcha, and if it's not her way to, if it's not her minig to have these things, my time to Rebuta, then why does Rebuta say that he needs to provide them? So, Lotzricha Kigon de Orche Didei Velav Orcha Dido. Well, it's talking about a situation where it's his minig, but not her minig. Tanakama Sover Kiaminon Ola Imo Ve'enu Yoreda Simo, says the Tanakama that when we have the concept that she can kind of get his upgrades, but not his downgrades, that if there are certain things that her husband does that are upgrades for her, so she can benefit from those upgrades. But if there are certain things that her husband does that would be considered downgrades for her, so then he cannot subject her to those downgrades. So here we're talking about where her minig was not to have a eulogist and 2 flautists, but his minig was to provide such things. And therefore the question is, so if it's his minig to provide such things, does he have to provide these things? When we say that he needs to provide the upgrades, is that only when she's alive? But what about now that she's not alive anymore? Does he still need to provide upgrades? So Tanakama says no, he doesn't need to provide the upgrades, because when we say that the husband must provide upgrades and provide no downgrades, that's only when she's alive. But once she's dead, so then he does not need to provide such upgrades as eulogists and flautists. Whereas Rebuta says no, even posthumously, probably not posthumously, it's probably posture, it's probably like a CH, posthumously, posthumously, pasta, it's not pasta, posthumously, posthumously. Posthumously. Maybe it is posthumously. After death. Rebuta says even after death, he still has to provide upgrades, such as a eulogist and 2 flautists. Amr of Chizda, Amr Ma'ukva, Halacha Krib. Yehuda says of Chizda, in the name of my Ukve, that the halacha is like Rebuta, that even posthumously, it's like a regular expression. Anybody know what a regular expression is? Regular expression is like this thing in computer programming where you can like parse a string based on a pattern, and you can like have like or clauses. So you can like give different examples, and if it matches any of them, it returns true. So you can have like Pasta, posthumously. Let's go back there. Wasn't that funny? Stop laughing. Let's go weiter. It says of Chizda, the name of Ukva, you have a fellow and he lost his mind. So Bezdin Yordan and Chosov, so I mean he can't provide for his family anymore. So Bezdin Yordan and Chosov, so Bezdin goes to his property. And from his sort of money that he has, and valuables that he has, we support his wife, his sons, his daughters, vidavar acher. We're going to have to explain later what that is. He says, I don't understand. Why should this be any different than the following brayso? If a fellow just bounced his family, he just left his family and went to who knows where. And now his wife is like, what the heck just happened? My husband just bounced. And she's like, now how are we going to support the family? Bezdin Yordan and Chosov. So Bezdin goes to his, possessions, stuff. V'zanon u'mefarnesin es ishto. And from his stuff, we support his wife. Avalo banav uvnosav v'lo davar acher. But not his sons, not his daughters, and not davar acher. Which again, we'll have to explain what davar acher is. So Ravina asks Rav Ashi, I don't understand. How come Rav Chizda is saying the name of our Ukva, that if a fellow loses his mind, so then we support his wife and his sons and his daughters and davar acher from his stuff, but if he bounces, so then we only support his wife. But no, it's probably not the right thing. It's like I don't know. What's that called? Like when you, I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? I don't know. Rav Ashi responds to Ravina and he says, look, there's a chilek over here. When he loses his mind suddenly, so then, he wasn't planning to lose his mind and he wants to, we assume that he wanted to be able to support his family. So we assume that we can go to his stuff, his property and his stuff to support his family, including his sons and his daughters and davar acher. But if he just bounces, well then, he's making his point clear that he's not interested anymore in supporting his family. And therefore, while his wife must be supported from his property, because that's a stipulation of the Ksubis, that she gets sustained from his property, but the sons and the daughters and davar acher, not. Fine. My davar acher. So what's davar acher? Right? That's the big question. What's davar acher? Rav Chizda Omar ze tachshit, Rav Yosef Omar tztake. So if Chizda says it's tachshit, and the initial way that Rashi understands it, he then learns it punkt fakert, but we'll go with the initial way, even though I think Rashi prefers the other way, but it was easier for me to understand the first way, and Article kind of also explains it that way, and puts the other way in a footnote, so we'll do it this way. So my davar acher, so when we say v'lo davar acher, right, that according to the Brisa it says that if the fellow just bounces, so then we could support his wife from his property, but not his sons, not his daughters, not davar acher. What's this davar acher that we can't purchase from his property? So Rav Chizda Amar ze tachshit, jewelry, that we don't buy her jewelry from his property. We buy food, but not jewelry. Rav Yosef Amar tztake, that we don't give her, I guess, she can't use that money to make donations, I think. Mandomer tachshit koshkein tztake. So Mandomer says that we don't give her jewelry, then we certainly don't give her money to be distributing to tztake. Mandomer tztake, when Mandomer says that we don't give her money for tztake, aval tachshit yavinan lo, but we do give her money to buy perfumes and stuff, to lo nichale de tinavo, because it's not shaykh that she should not be able to present herself. So therefore, she can buy perfume with that money. Amar Rav Chia bar Rav and Amar Rav Huna mishahalach limdinas hayom umeisa ishto. So what happens if you have a fellow who goes traveling someplace and then his wife dies? Bezdin yodin l'nechazav v'kovin osa lefi chvodo. So Bezdin, okay. So Bezdin can go to his property and bury her based on his honor. What? Only based on his honor, not based on her honor. Even according to his honor. It's teaching us. So it teaches that she gets upgrades based on him, but not downgrades based on him, and that applies even after death. So basically, we take into account what her honor would be plus what his honor would be, and we deliver value based on the higher of those two honors. And this is even though she's already dead. Omer of Masna says, Masna Omer in Mesa lo sikbrua min chasov. If a fellow says that if my wife dies, then do not bury her from his property, right? Meaning you have a fellow and he's on his deathbed, and he tells the people that so he's going to die, and he's saying that when his wife dies, don't bury her based on from his property. Don't use his property to bury his wife. Now, so Omer of Masna Omer Mesa lo sikbrua min chasav shomano. We listen to him. So Maishna ki Omer denafli nichse kame yasme kilo Omer nami nichse kame yasme ramu. Right, meaning he said, look, so what's happening here? You have a fellow, he's dying, right? Now, when he's dead, who inherits his property? His sons inherit his property. So he's saying, look, don't bury my widow from the property. Now, the thing is, it's not his property anyway, so we say we listen to him. Of course we listen to him, it's not his property anyways, right? Omer of Masna, I'm going to read that again. Omer of Masna, Omer, if a fellow says, now after I die, in Mesa, when my widow dies, lo sikbrua min chasav, don't bury her from his property. Shomelo, we listen to him. Maishno ki Omer, how come we listen to him? Denafli nichse kame yasme, because the property now belongs to the children. They could do it what they want. Kilo Omer nami nichse kame yasme ramu. But why does it matter if he said anything, regardless of if he made this statement or not? The property belongs to the kids. They could do whatever they want with the money. So regardless of if he says you don't need to bury my widow from the inheritance or not, they don't have to anyways. So lo Omer im meis hu lo tikbru min chasav. No, rather if the fellow says that when he dies, do not use his property to pay for his own funeral, ain't shomen lo, we do not listen to him. Because in that case, if he dies and he says that none of his property should be used to pay for his own funeral, so who's going to have to pay for his funeral? The public funds. So we say we don't listen to him in that case because he can't, enrich his children, and they won't have to pay for his funeral, and they can keep that money while requiring public funds to be used to pay for his funeral. We can't allow that, and we don't listen to him, and we bury him from his own property. And then just a clarification of the first part of that, right? So we said that, right, that when he dies, so his children inherit him, and then when his widow dies, they don't have to pay for her burial. And the reason is because when he dies, she receives her Ksubis payment, right? Now, therefore, when she then dies, whoever inherits her Ksubis payment, right, whatever was left over from her Ksubis payment, whoever inherits her will be responsible to pay for her funeral expenses, but not whoever inherited the husband. Okay, fine. Where are we? We are at the Mishnah, all the way at the bottom of Daf Mem Ches Amud Aleph. L'olam hi b'reshus ha'av ad shetikonis l'shus habal. So the daughter is in the sort of possession, the reshus, the domain of the father, until she is then in the domain of the husband. So, okay, so you have this girl, and she's born, and she's in the reshus of her father, and then she remains in the reshus of her father, assuming that she's not a bogeres, because when she becomes a bogeres, she's in her own reshus. But then so she's in the reshus of her father until she gets married, and at which point she's in the reshus of the baal, of the husband. The reshus abal l'nisuin. Fine. So Mosar Av l'shluchi abal. If the father gave his daughter to the messengers of the husband, at that point she's already considered out of the reshus of the Av and into the rishus of the Baal. Now, if the father went along with the messengers of the husband, or the messengers of the father went with the messengers of the husband, so then she is still in the rishus of her father. But then, when the messengers of the father give her to the messengers of the husband, at that point she is in the rishus of the husband. Says the Gemara, my la'olam. What does it mean la'olam? That forever she is in the rishus of the father until she enters into the rishus of the husband for marriage, for nisuin. La'afuke mi mishnah rishona. Friends, you remember the first daf of Masechta Ksubis? Tetnani gezman v'lo nisu ochlos mishalov ochlos bitrume. That the right, we had quoted on the first daf of the of Ksubis, we had quoted a mishnah from later on that says that if it came time for them to get married and for whatever reason they didn't, she can, right, if it's based coming from him, he's the one being stalling, so then she could already, if he's a kohen and she's a bas Yisrael, from that point she could already start eating truma. Now this mishnah, however, says le'olam hi b'rishus ha'av ad shetikones l'rishus ha'ba'al l'nisuin. But this mishnah though is saying no, she remains in the rishus of the father, and if he's a Yisrael, she cannot eat truma until they get married. So it's to argue on that other mishnah that says that she can start eating truma already from the time that they were meant to get married. This mishnah says no, she remains in the rishus of the father and she cannot eat truma until she goes into the rishus of the husband when they get married. Right, so my la'olam, what does it mean la'olam? I'm reading that again. La'afuke mi mishnah rishona, to argue it to the exclusion of the mishnah that we learned to Tanan, higiyaz man v'lo nisu, that if the time to get married arrives and they don't get married, ochlos mishalov ochlos bitrume, she could already start eating truma, kamash malan la'olam. That's why it says la'olam over here, to argue on that and say no, she remains in the father's rishus until they actually get married. So if the messengers of the father give her to the messengers of the husband, so at that point she's considered in the rishus of the husband. Amar Rav misirasa lakol chutz mitrumis. So says Rav that when we say that she's now in the rishus of the husband, it's for everything. He inherits her. It could be made for nidarim. The only exclusion is truma, as we said, right? La'olam ibechezkas, right? That when the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, at that point she's considered in his rishus for all things, with the exception being truma. She cannot eat truma until right, if she's a bas Yisrael and he's a kohen, she cannot eat truma until the marriage. Rav Asi Omer, says Rav Asi, af li truma. No, even for truma, says Rav Asi, she can even eat truma at that point when the father gives her to the messengers of the husband. When the father gives her to the messengers of the husband, she can already, if she's a bas Yisrael and he's a kohen, she can already eat truma. Eizvi Rav Huna le Rav Asi. Rav Huna, a student of Rav, as a kasha against Rav Asi. V'amilo Chia barav le Rav Asi. Some say it was Rav's son Chia as a kasha on Rav Asi. Right? Because Rav, of course, says that she's not yet able to eat truma, and Rav Asi says she is able to eat truma. Le'olam ibirshus ha'av she tkonis lechuppeh. Right? They quote Rav Asi, our Mishnah, that says that she remains in the rishus of the father until she goes to the chuppeh. Until she goes to the chuppah. And we explain that means that she cannot yet eat truma. Rav says to Rav Huna, his student, and to Chia, his son, Rav says to them, haven't I told you, lo tizlu basar ipcha, don't try to bring a proof from a brisa that or in this case a Mishnah, that could be proved the opposite. Because Rav Asi could answer to you, misirasa zoi knisasa lichuppah, that when the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, that's already the knisasa lichuppah, right? He's giving his daughter to the messengers of the husband so that they can get married. And at that point, it should already be considered like Knisa l'chuppah, and therefore she could already eat Truma. So therefore, Rav, even though Rav Asi is arguing on Rav still says to Rav Huna and Chia, his son, who were supporting him, that look, you can't bring a support for me from that Mishnah, because that Mishnah you could really explain in the opposite way as well. Shmuel Amar, now Shmuel disagrees, and he says, Li Rushasa, that with regard to inheriting her, that once the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband can now inherit her, right? So whatever her father had sort of stipulated as part of the Ksubah that she was going to bring into the marriage, the husband can already inherit her at that point, once the father gave his daughter to the messengers of the husband. Rish Lakish Amar Ksubasa, and Rish Lakish says with regard to her Ksubah. So Ksubasa Mai, what do you mean with regard to her Ksubah? The Imesa Yaris, right? Mai, the Imesa Yarislu, that if it means that, well, if she dies now on the way, he will inherit whatever she brought in with her to her Ksubah, Hanu de Shmuel, but that's what Shmuel says, that he inherits her. Ravina says, Ravina Lomar, to say, Ksubasa mi acher mono. What it means is that if at this point her husband dies and she gets married to somebody else, the Ksubah will be a mono. Even though they didn't actually technically get married yet, but what it means is for the Ksubah, that with regard to once the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, at that point, even if the husband now dies, and now she gets remarried, her Ksubah would be 100 zuz, not 200. Rabbi Yochanan Reb Chanina, Darmitavai Misiros Lakol Af Letrume, Rabbi Yochanan and Chanina say that when the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, it's for everything, including Truma. Like Rav Asi, who was a student of Rabbi Yochanan, said. Meisvei, we have a question on everybody other than Shmuel. I guess technically it's a support for Shmuel and a question on everybody else. Shmuel, of course, says that when the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, he can now inherit her. So if the father goes with the messengers of the husband, or the messengers of the father go with the messengers of the husband, or she had some kind of a courtyard that she owned on the way, and they went in there to sleep, right? So even though her Ksubah is still at her father, even if all the possessions of her Ksubah, the husband had already collected, so it's as though the husband has the Ksubah already, Mesa Avia Yorsha. If she would die at this point, her father would still inherit her, not her husband, right? Meaning, because the father went along with the messengers of the husband, or the father's messengers went with the messengers of the husband, and when they go to this chutzner, it's a chutzner that she owns. So even though the husband chaptarain the stuff from the Ksubah, nonetheless, if she dies at this point, she's still considered her father would inherit her. However, meaning in the first case, the father went along with the messengers of the husband, but in this case, he's giving her to the messengers of the husband. Or the messengers of the husband gave her to the messengers of the father gave her to the messengers of the husband. Or they or he had his own courtyard on the journey, and they then went into his chotzer with the intent of marriage, even though the contents of her dowry are still at her father's house, mesa ba'ila yosha. If she dies, then her husband will inherit her at that point. So, Bamed Dvar Mamur Lirushasa Aval Litrume in Isha Ocheles B'Truma Achi Tikonis L'Chuppah. Now, this is specifically that he would inherit her, but with regard to Truma, she would not be able to eat Truma yet until she goes under the Chuppah, until she gets married. So, when we say, so we say over here that basically the father gave her to the messengers of the husband. So at that point, the husband will be able to inherit her, But in terms of truma, she can't eat truma until the actual marriage. Tiyufta d'chulu tiyufta, and it's a kasha on everybody other than Shmuel, because here it's saying that Shmuel, here it's saying that he inherits her, but it says that she won't be able to eat truma. So it's unlike Ravasi. It's unlike Ravasi who says that she will be able to eat truma. It's unlike Rav who says that he doesn't yet inherit her. No, who says that? Yeah, I guess he doesn't yet inherit her. Okay, fine. Hagufa kasha. So we say 1 second. This is contradictory. Omart nichnuso imo lolin. So on the one hand, it says that when she goes to her own courtyard, and she doesn't, and she goes and she sleeps in this courtyard with her husband, but she doesn't have the intention of marriage when they go to sleep in the courtyard. Taima dilolin hostome. I'm sorry. That's right. Right, meaning the reason why they're not going to be considered married is because she davka went in with the intention of just to go to sleep, not to get married. But what if she didn't specifically have that intention? What if she just went in without any particular intention? So, then it sounds like by default it would be considered for marriage. But ema seifa, but what does the rest of the brisa say? That davka, if she went into his courtyard with the intention of marriage, but without any particular intention, it would be, it would be considered just, regular sleeping, but not for marriage. So the question is, what's the default? Is the default for marriage or not for marriage? Rav Ashi stome katani. Rav Ashi says no. It's teaching to she didn't go in with any particular intention in both cases. Rather, stam chotzer dida lolin stam chotzer dida linisuin. There's an extra factor that we weren't taking into account, which is that in the first part it's her chotzer, and then second part it's his chotzer, and they're not going in with any particular intention of nisuin or not nisuin. But when she goes into her chotzer, so by default she's just going into sleep. But when they're going to his chotzer, then by default the intention there is for marriage. Tana Masar av l'shluchi abal v'zinso. Oh, so interesting. Okay, so if the father, I'm just trying to think where we should stop, because the truth is this discussion goes on really until we get to the Mishnah halfway through Mem Tes Amud Aleph. Friends, should we do that? How do you guys feel about that? How do you guys feel? I mean, it's pretty early. I think we're only about 25 minutes into the shir, so we could probably get to the Mishnah and Daf Mem Tes Amud Aleph, and we won't really go over time, and we'll have less to do tomorrow. What do you guys think about that? And we'll be able to complete what the topic that we're starting now. What do you guys say? We say do it? Okay, let's do it. So, Tana, we taka learn in a brisa. Masar av l'shluchi abal. So if the father gave his daughter to the messengers of the husband, vizinsa, and at that point already, she was mizaneh. Harezo b'chenek. So the punishment for znus at this point is strangulation, not stoning. Right? Of course, in Nara Morasa, we've learned recently that she gets skila, but once the father gives her to the messengers of the husband, and they're going to go then afterwards and get married. So at this point, she's no longer a nar. She's not considered a nara morasa with regard to skila. She's going to get chenek like a married woman. How do we know this? Amr Ami Bar Chama says of Ami Bar Chama Amr. The pasuk says Lizno's base avia. Right? That it says by the nara morasa who gets skila. It says that she was mizana, the house of her father. Prat the shemasar av l'shluchei abal, to the exclusion of once the father gives her to the messengers of the husband. Ve'ema prat shenichnaso l'chupa v'lo nevala. But let's say what it means liznos beis avia is to the exclusion of once she gets married, even though they haven't had bia yet. Right? Maybe when the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, it's still going to be skila. And what the pasuk of Liznos Beis Avia is coming to say is that, but once she gets married, even if they haven't had bia yet, then it's chenek. But if the father simply just gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, it would still be skila. So Amar Rave, Amali Ami, Chuppah Behedjik Siva. Rave says, look, the thing about the chuppah, that once they get married, even if they haven't had bia yet, to say that the punishment at that point is chenek, we already learned that from a different pasuk. Kiya naira bisula me'orasa. It says by naira me'orasa, it says three things. It says that she'll be a naira, she'll be a bisula, and she'll be me'orasa. Leish, to a fellow. Naira velo bogeres. She has to be a naira, not a bogeres. Bisula velo be'ula. She has to be a bisula and not a be'ula. Me'orasa velo nesua. And she has to be dafka engaged, not married. Now, my nesua. When we say married, what do we mean? Ilemi nesua mamish. If it means mamish married, that they had bia already, well then hanu bisula velo be'ula. Well, we know that it wouldn't be considered naira me'orasa because, right, where she gets skila, because she would have to be besula, and here she's already be'ula. So rather, it must be that what it's saying is that even if she got married but has not yet had bia with her husband, still already it would no longer be skila, it would be chenek. So we already know from that pasuk of nair besula me'orasa that nichnas al chubav lo nivala would be chenek already. So then what do we learn out from the pasuk of Liznos Beis Avia, to the exclusion of once the father gives her to the messengers of the husband, at that point it would no longer be skila, it would be chenek. Okay. Now we digress for a little bit, and then we'll get back to two other ways that we learn out that dafka it's going to be chenek once the father gives her to the messengers of the husband and not skila. Ve'ema heicha dehadra levenosha hadra lemilsa kamaisa. So, affecting Gemara, what if she turns around and goes home? What if the father gave her to the messengers of the husband, and then she says, "To heck with this," and she goes home? So does she go back to her original, so does she kind of go back to her father's house and her father would inherit her? So, okay, fine. Oh, and then, right, and the question is, if she's mizana at that point, would it be skila or would it be chenek? So Amar Rava says, Rava ahu kvar posko tanit v'bishma. We already learned this from the Tanit V'Bishma, the Tanit V'Bishma. V'neder amonu grusha, that it says by nidarim, that the nidarim, the vows of a widow or a divorcee, kol asher asa nafsha yakum aleh. So any vows that she makes, if she's a widow or a divorcee, well, there's nobody to nullify them, and you know, she's gonna have to deal with, she's gonna have to be mekayim them. Mata amud lomar. So what do we learn out? How come it has to say why does the pasuk have to tell us that the vows of a widow or divorcee, she has to, uphold them? Well, obviously she has to uphold them, right? Well, she when she got married, she's no longer in the rishus of her father, and because she's divorced or widowed, she's no longer in the rishus of her husband. There's nobody to be made for the nedarim. Obviously, she has to upkeep them. Uphold them. So what this pasuk is teaching is that in a situation where the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, or the messengers of the husband gave her to the messengers of the father gave her to the messengers of the husband, and then she became widowed or she became divorced on the way. Beis avia shel zo, or beis baila shel zo. So, do I consider it to be the father's house or the husband's house? So what the pasuk teaches when it says kol asher asa anafsha yakum alel, that any nedarim that she makes, she will have to uphold. It means that once she leaves her father's rishus for 1 second, you can no longer do afaras nedarim. So meaning, we have this pasuk that says right, that the vows of a widow or a divorcee must be upheld because there's nobody to nullify them. This is obvious. She's divorced, she's widowed, she's not in her father's house, and she doesn't have a husband anymore. So obviously she has to uphold these vows. So then what do we learn out from the pasuk? It says she has to uphold her vows. It's coming to teach a situation where the father gave her to the messengers of the husband, and at that point she's no longer in the rishus of the father, and she can no longer ever go back to the rishus of her father. And that, right, we said One, right? So we say that at that point, any nedarim that she makes, she'll have to uphold because she is no longer in the rishus of her father at all. Fine. Omer Papa says of Papa. So now, concluding the initial question that we had asked, which is that, or the statement that is that once she leaves the rishus of the father right to the messengers of the husband, so we said that at that point she would be chayiv chenek if she's mezaneh. So we had learned it out earlier from the pasuk of Liznos Beis Avia. Now Omer Papa says, Papa Afonanam Tanina. We actually have a Mishnah that says Abal Naira Morasa, that a fellow who sleeps with a Naira Morasa, Eino chayiv. So he's not chayiv. Ajite Naira Besula Meorasa. She has to be a Naira, a Besula, and Meorasa. Vihi Beis Avia, and she's in her father's house. So Bishlama Naira. Velo Bogeris. Okay, I understand, as we've said, a Naira, not a Bogeris. Besula, velo Beula, Meorasa, velo Nisua. Bebeis Avia lemute mai. What does it mean, Bebeis Avia? Is it not coming to say that also once the father gives her to the messengers of the husband, she's no longer considered Bebeis Avia, and therefore it won't be a Chiyuv Skila. It will be chenek instead. Amr Nachman bar Yitzchak. Hafananami Tanina says of Nachman bar Yitzchak that we talk also learn in the Mishnah. Habal Eishes Ish. Fellow sleeps with an Eishes Ish. Kevin shenichnaso l'rishus habal l'nisuin. That once she goes into the rishus of the husband for marriage, afal pisha lo nivala. Even though she hasn't had beer yet, habaleh areze bechenek. Then anybody who sleeps with her, it's going to be chenek. Nichnaso l'rishus habal ba'alma. So it says just nichnas al rishus habal, goes into the rishus habal be'alma. Just in general, i.e., even if the father just gave her to the messengers of the husband, shmamina. So we see from there. So we saw three reasons why, once the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, at that point, if she's mezaneh, the punishment will be chenek. Friends, that was daf mem ches, and also a little bit of daf mem tes of Masechta Ksubis. So the first part of the daf, we really just finished off the previous Mishnah about a husband having to pay for the funeral expenses of his wife, and that we pass on like Reb Yehuda that he even needs to pay for eulogists and flautists in situations where it's his minig. And then we get to different things that the husband has to pay for if he loses his mind or if he just bounces. Then we got to a new Mishnah that says that we said that a girl remains in her father's rishus until she gets married, and we want to say that, right, Rav, we saw this machlokas, that once the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, to what, so then what exactly happens? Rav says that she's still unable to eat truma until they get actually married, and he brings a proof from our Mishnah. Rav Asi says that no, she can, and supported by Rabbi Yochanan, says no, at that point she can already eat truma. The opinion of Shmuel was at that point the husband can inherit her, and the opinion of Rish Lakish was at that point, if the husband dies and she gets remarried, so then the Ksuba would already be a mana, even though they didn't actually technically get married yet. And then we got to this point that, as we were discussing at the end of the daf, that once the father gives his daughter to the messengers of the husband, if she's mezana, then it will be a chiyuv chenek and not chiyuv skila, and we learned it out from three different sources. Friends, that was daf mem ches of Masechta Ksubis. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.